Is Syria finally free? With Bashar al-Assad deposed and opposition forces declaring victory, many are celebrating. But concern is growing that this could be the calm before the storm, with former al-Qaeda fighters now in charge of a fragile nation. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Syria. It's what millions of Syrians dreamed of for decades, the downfall of a single-family power structure that ruled the country since the 1970s. But now that that's happened, many are bracing themselves for a new Syria to come, with fractured opposition forces, some designated terrorists, unified against a common enemy that's now fled to Moscow. So, can opposition groups stay united in order to provide a peaceful transfer of power where eventually Syrians can decide for themselves who will govern? Here's a look.
Syrians are rejoicing after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Opposition forces entered the capital Damascus on Sunday, ending the 53-year rule of the Assad family. People have waved the revolution flag, toppled statues, and stormed his residence and palace. For many, it was too good to be real.
It's a feeling of joy after 13 years of pressure and tragedy since we were born. The regime pressured and hurt us, but now we are free, without any fear or oppression, which will be lifted from our hearts.
We did not expect this great surprise, to sleep and wake up to find that the dictator who was slaughtering and killing the people in the name of democracy and freedom, this criminal who oppressed the people for 50 years, is gone.
Opposition forces have also freed detainees from Assad's notorious prisons. Thousands were kept behind bars for years, enduring systematic torture and abuse. Now they are also celebrating freedom and rejoining their loved ones. Assad had ruled the country with an iron fist for 24 years. His brutal crackdown on the 2011 pro-democracy protests saw the country descend into a brutal civil war, resulting in more than 500,000 deaths and displacing half the population. He maintained his grip on power with the help of Russia and Iran. But with Moscow occupied with its war in Ukraine and Tehran and its allies weakened by Israeli attacks, Assad was effectively left abandoned. He and his family fled the country for Moscow and were granted asylum. Now, the opposition forces are preparing to rule. Mohamed Aljoulani, commander of the biggest group, Hayat Tahrir Alsham, says the victory will be a turning point in Syria's history. And while the Assad-appointed Mohammad Ghazi will carry on as interim prime minister, Aljoulani is now the figurehead of post-Assad Syria. Some, though, are concerned about his past allegiance to al-Qaeda. He renounced the terror group in 2013 and has tried to shift focus on national unity, but remains on the terror lists of the US and EU. The US is also concerned about the re-emergence of Daesh, as thousands of its fighters are still detained in Syria. And some fear possible infighting between various opposition forces operating on the ground. For now, the opposition is coordinating to ensure a smooth transition, and there is jubilation in the streets. Syrians are looking forward with hope to a better, yet uncertain future.
So, will Syria remain stable or potentially descend into chaos via internal division? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are, from Doha, Assistant Professor at Qatar University and Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Middle East Programs, Ali Bakir. Also from Doha, CEO of Gulf State Analytics, Giorgio Cafiero. And from Washington, Senior Fellow and Director at the Atlantic Council's The Future of DHS Project, Thomas Warwick. Thanks all so much for being with me. Thomas, I'll start with you. First of all, do you feel good about what's happening, or is it just too kind of precarious right now to say that this, for example, won't turn into an Iraq post-Saddam scenario?
Or Libya either, for that matter. No, a number of senior U.S. officials or former U.S. officials were circulating a video yesterday about the end of the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, where one of the characters says, a Zen master says, we'll see after everything good or bad. And that's exactly where I think we are today. There is so much up in the air. History hangs on so many knife's edges. A whole host of things have to go well. They could all go very badly. But the real promise of a much better peace for the Middle East is possible.
What worries you the most, though, going forward right now?
Well, I'm going to skip over all of the easy questions, like what happens to Assad's chemical weapons, his missile stocks, and other supplies. And I'm even going to skip over the obvious threat that President Biden spoke to yesterday about preventing Daesh, the formerly so-called Islamic State, from reasserting power in northeastern Syria, and the relations that have always been tense between Turkey and the YPG. Those are all very real and very obvious. The real challenge is going to be putting together a Syrian political framework by which the warring factions will lay down their arms and work together. That is the real prize, and that's going to be very hard. Turkey is in the driver's seat, though, and the United States fully appreciates that. So there's a great deal of hope for increased cooperation among Ankara, Washington, Amman, and even Iraq and Israel. So there is a lot of work that has to be done, and it's going to take, I think, some cooperation among players who have had at sometimes good relations, but at sometimes frosty relations.
Okay. Giorgio, I saw you agree with a few points there, but are you on the same page, more or less?
Yeah, I certainly agree that right now there is reason to be hopeful, and I think there are many opportunities to see Syria move ahead in a brighter direction following so many decades of the Assad family being in power. But I also to recognize that, as Thomas pointed out, there are so many delicate issues. There are many ways in which the situation could move in a troubling direction. It's very early on in the post-Assad period of Syria, and I think it's very difficult to predict how the political developments are going to unfold. So many questions about how other countries in the region are going to deal with HTS, also important questions about global actors and how they will be reacting to the new realities of post-Assad Syria. But I think while we're always voicing concerns, we must at the same time try to be cautiously optimistic and see opportunities for an inclusive political system in the country.
Yeah, so Ali Bakir, if we are cautiously optimistic here, I guess one of the positive points is that the interim Prime Minister al-Awlali, unlike when the Ba'ath Party in Iraq was deposed, for example, he's actually talking to and apparently working with the opposition groups to keep government infrastructure intact. I mean, is that a good sign?
Thank you for hosting me first. Yeah, definitely. This is a very good sign. Although I have to say that I am not in favor of making comparisons between the situation in Syria and both Iraq or Libya, because we all know the Iraqi situation was very different. There was a US-led invasion with the pretext of acquiring weapons of mass destruction. In the Syria, the dynamics are very different.
It was still the sudden downfall of a dictator, is the very sudden downfall that many weren't prepared for.
Sure, but the way also definitely. But the foreign factor in bringing down Saddam was very obvious and for the wrong reasons. While in Syria, it's as we all witnessed during the last 14 days or so, it's mostly internal Syrian operation. Syrian people has been, of course, struggling, fighting with Assad regime for the last 14 years, and they paid a heavy price, ultimately bringing this regime down, despite the fact that several countries, including Iran, Russia, Israel, and the US, maintain to prefer to maintain the status quo, if I may say, but surprisingly, it fell down quickly. Nevertheless, the Syrian rebels seems to be on the right track for the current moment, and they obviously have very high self-awareness of necessity to maintain the state's resources and institutions working properly. They have even called the former officials to resume their jobs and whatever responsibilities on their shoulder to keep the work of the state on. However, of course, although we are cautiously optimistic, we should not ignore that there will be mass challenges ahead of us. I should point out that one big obstacles that we should be aware of it. The more the foreign factor, the foreign interference in Syria, the more the situation will be difficult. So my recommendation for all countries not to intervene and interfere, try to put agenda for the Syrian people. We should also give them a space to decide for themselves. So this is if we have learned something from Iraq, Libya, or elsewhere.
Yeah, and Thomas Warwick, that would be a challenge going forward. To what extent, if at all, any foreign powers should kind of be intervening in what's happening in Syria, because sometimes there comes a point where some kind of foreign assistance is the only way, many would argue, to guide a country in the right direction. But I don't know.
Well, yeah, I would actually have to be realistic. There are so many foreign governments that have such a stake in what's going on in Syria. I think we have to be realistic because one of the most important things to bear in mind is that foreign assistance to different factions within the rebel alliance that overthrew Assad will actually, in all likelihood, determine who are the winners and who are the losers. I would actually like to ask Ali, though, in his view, should the United Nations be leading the political reconciliation? Because that was the process laid down by United Nations Security Council Resolution 2254, which the United States and other countries have all pointed to in the last few hours as the basis for trying to create a constitution and a political framework. Because if you don't let the United Nations broker the political arrangements, then the question is, who does that? Does Turkey do that? Does
Fair
Iran?
enough question. I mean, do you consider, Ali, the United Nations, is that foreign interference, or would that be an acceptable structure to guide this process forward?
It's extremely important questions, and I think that first we should let the Syrians answer it, not myself. But since you asked me, we have to read first the resolution, which says that a transitional government between Assad regime and the opposition. And since Assad regime is not existing anymore, so we have also a problem of how to interpret and implement this resolution, assuming that we will move forward with the existing mechanism. So we have, as you can see, a lot of problems and obstacles. My point is that we should not impose anything on the Syrians. They should decide by themselves whether they would take it from here, involve the UN in this process, and move forward.
Okay.
Or maybe they would have a better, suggestion. Maybe they would, within themselves, can agree on a certain formula that might work better than the UN, because also, again, UN experiences, unfortunately, are not so promising until now. And we saw the more the foreign interference, the more the problems.
But let me ask Giorgio, because if we're talking about, the Syrian people deciding, then fine, you have to move toward an election. And while you're talking about holding elections, if HTS under Mohamed Aljoulani is in charge, would they actually accept an election in which they could easily lose all that they've fought for?
Great question. First, on UN Security Council Resolution 2254, obviously now that the Assad government has fallen and we're in a totally different situation than we were when the Security Council passed that resolution in December 2015, very important aspects of it need to be changed. But I do think it can serve as a good blueprint for a UN-facilitated, nonetheless Syrian-led political process that can hopefully lead Syria to a situation in which there is an inclusive government. In terms of the election question, this is obviously very delicate. I think that holding an election right now, very soon, could potentially be problematic, mindful of immediate issues on the ground in Syria and some continued violence that's taking place. So I think it would probably be wise to not rush that process. About how HTS would respond to a potential election in which some other faction wins, I simply don't know. I think many would be a little skeptical about that happening, but time will tell. I'm not going to make a bold forecast or prediction there.
Right, but I mean, Giorgio is skeptical. So, Thomas, I mean, what are the chances of a free and fair election? I mean, we were told the Taliban was eventually going to hold some sort of election in Afghanistan upon the takeover. So, what do you see the chances with a former al-Qaeda organization?
But let's remember that Hayat Tahrir Alsham is only one group of many within the opposition alliance that has brought Assad down, and many of them have different political philosophies and views on things like the role of religion in government and public life. Look, those of us who lived through the process of outside political leaders saying there need to be elections right away are extremely humble about the prospects of elections actually resolving anything. The one thing I want to stress is that money is the mother's milk of politics. This is an American expression, but it applies in democratic elections everywhere in the world. One of the things that we did wrong in Iraq was rush the country to elections too soon. And it turned out that Iran was funding political parties and the United States was not. So established parties like the Kurdish parties in the north did well, but the parties that took money from Iran ended up dominating Iraqi politics for the last 20 years. Now, in the case of Syria, this turns out to be one of the most consequential decisions that nobody has yet made. But I can guarantee you there will be foreign money flowing into Syrian politics to try to influence the outcome of the process, even before there are elections. And I think you would need to have some kind of understanding among the major players with the hopes of them agreeing on who gets the benefits of this largesse. But I got to tell you, this is not going to be easy, and the odds of it going wrong are greater than the odds of it going right.
Okay. Let me turn to Ali then, because as Thomas is saying, that there will be foreign money involved going forward, especially on the path to an election, if it's even possible. We now have the U.S. President-elect, Donald Trump, saying that the U.S. needs to stay out, probably what you want to hear, but he also wants to do what is in Israel's best interest, both to, stop the creation of another Gaza-style state on Israel's border, or even the spread of Daesh as well. So do you think the United States, for example, under Trump, will play zero role, as Trump has said, or will they go on to, I can see Thomas doesn't think so, but go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, I will not bet on that. Of course, I'm definitely with what Trump has said. There should be minimum foreign interference, and this is for all players, not particularly for the U.S. also. We should give a space for the Syrians to decide on their behalf. I have to highlight that I am totally against these kind of comparisons, which are out of context, and it's also pretty much soon to talk about elections, and even if we are talking about money, I mean, who has the money? At the end of the day, at the current situation, it's neither Iran nor Russia. It's U.S. allies, whether in the Gulf or Europe. So at the end of the day, these are like they have similar agendas. But anyway, regardless of this, I think that Israel. I mean, when it comes to Israel, it's not in interest for Israel to have united, free, democratic, and strong Syria. This is very much obvious, and we already started to see the Israeli intervention to sabotage the current movement, which is going in the right way, as far as I know, at least at the current moment inside Syria. I mean, the Israelis started bombing inside Syria. They already occupied more Syrian lands, adding them to the Golan Heights with the pretext of creating buffer zone. I don't think, I mean, chaos in Syria can be a threat to everyone in the region, but from the Israeli perspective, as long as this chaos is away from their borders and is not threatening them, they don't care much. They have the aerial superiority, and they have the backing of the US. So I think that the Israeli factor is one delicate and very dangerous threat to the future of Syria. Everyone should take note of it, and the UN must, and the international community also must play a critical role in drawing a line for Israel not to do what it's doing right now and to try to stop it, because at the end of the day, if it continues, it would draw, I think, an early conflict between the Syrian rebels and Israel, and this will drive the current situation away from maintaining the stability and security of Syria and trying to build its future to a new struggle with Israel, which is not in one's favor.
Yeah, you know, Giorgio, first of all, it's interesting to hear Ali say, you know, he's against making comparisons, but some would argue we have to learn from history, and there have been examples set before that could indicate what measures might need to be taken based on what's happened even in the recent past. But I want to go back to the fact that there are still very dangerous people operating in Syria, not least Daesh. The U.S. had already said that Daesh attacks in Syria had doubled in 2024. The U.S. is now hitting Daesh targets on the ground. I mean, is this, you know, a very dangerous snake that's ready to raise its head and strike hard again if it senses an opportunity?
Well, certainly chaos is the oxygen that groups like ISIS need to breathe. Groups like ISIS are always opportunistic, finding power vacuums to try to fill, always taking advantage of chaotic crises in the Middle East. And I certainly think folks who have raised concerns about how ISIS could potentially benefit from the current situation in Syria if there is widespread turmoil, breakdown of state institutions, those are all very, very valid concerns. Now, who should be dealing with that? How to deal with it? There are many questions to raise there, but yeah, I certainly do have huge concerns about possible scenarios in which ISIS can sort of regain some of the power that it had from the 2010s.
Right. Thomas, let me move on with you then. I mean, if you have something to say about Daesh and being a severe threat, or if that's too difficult to actually discern right now, there's also the issue of where Russia and Iran will now stand. They have lost a lot, particularly Russia having its only proper foothold in the Eastern Mediterranean with its military base on the coast of Syria. What is supposed to happen to these forces now? I mean, will they just take this loss, Iran and Russia, and sit back quietly? Or will we hear more nefarious maneuverings from both of them?
Well, so Russia is actually going to have to take the loss. We will see whether the new Syrian government invites the Russians to leave in an orderly manner. Moscow has already shown an interest in trying to curry favor, and I have no doubt there are going to be suitcases of cash moving in to try to buy that kind of influence, at least with the local warlords in Western Syria. But that's something I think that the new political authorities in Damascus are going to say no to. The Iranian role is likely to be much more dangerous. There is a real possibility that Iranian-lined elements drawing on the people in the former Assad regime that they used to work with would try to stage a coup in about 10 months to a year's time. This is a real danger to the emerging Syrian political process because Syria is going to be ripe for coups and unrest for several years until there's an accepted political order. And trying to build that kind of national consensus, which really is a project for the Syrian people, Ali is certainly right about that. But one of the keys in what they need to build is one that would prevent an Iranian-backed coup from toppling a Syrian nationalist regime, and that is a real risk.
Okay, Ali, your feelings on that? We've got about 90 seconds left. Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But I think that Iranians' chances to come back to Syria, at least at the short term, is very difficult. And they have now to think of their own security because they are, I mean, their whole grand strategy of forward defense has been hit dramatically and in a big way. They have to reassess what's happening right now, and they lost their chance in Syria. I think there is two scenarios. Either they will be pragmatic to deal with whoever will emerge out of the current situation, or they will try to sabotage the current situation if they see that it's not in their favor and that chaos would serve them more. But again, even this scenario, they are not in a favorable position given that their allies in the region, especially in Lebanon and Iraq, are being also hit, and they don't want to get involved in such a a gamble on behalf of Iran. So I think Iran is in a very difficult situation, much more than Russia when it comes to Syria.
Okay, Ali, that will have to be the final word. For this edition of the Newsmakers, I'd like to thank all three of you sincerely so much for being with me. Greatly appreciated of all your insights. And thanks to our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.